This morning our text is Mark chapter 14, verses 1 to 11. I've titled this morning's message, Anointed and Betrayed. Let's begin by reading Mark chapter 14, verses 1 to 2. It says there, "Now the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were looking for some sly way to arrest Jesus and kill him. But not during the feast, they said, or the people may riot." We've come to a sad chapter in the book of Mark. These two verses display the hatred of men in all of its ugliness. According to verses 1 and 2, the religious elite are fed up with Jesus. They want Jesus, D-E-A-D, dead. At this point, they really don't care what they've got to do to get her done. They're looking for some sly way to get rid of him. And they don't really care how they get it done, as long as they keep themselves safe in the process. They hope to have him executed, you see, because they're really ticked off because Jesus has opposed their hypocrisy. They claim to be godly men, walking around in their flowing robes with their chests puffed out and their nose stuck up in the air and the bells tinkling along the bottom of the ruffles of their long flowing gowns, their vestitures, if you will. But Jesus has proved them to be nothing more than religious phonies, religious fakes. Jesus has made fools out of them more than once. He's embarrassed them in front of the common folks in the land, and they're not going to stand for that. You see, Jesus is hurting their business. Jesus is hurting their pride. Jesus is taking their followers. Those who used to flock to the temples are now flocking to Jesus. These religious leaders controlled the commerce inside of the temple. They rubber stamped the folks who were selling temple coins, sheep, birds, and other items in the temple. They had their greedy little paws constantly in the pot. They charged a fee for the vendors to sell there, for the money changers to set up their booths there, and they also collected a percentage from all of their sales. They were double dipping, if you will. When Jesus threw the merchants and the money changers out of the temple court, he had hurt their pocketbooks. And they decided right then and there, Jesus has got to go. As we move through this passage, we'll discover the truth. Money matters just a little too much to these guys. Now, there's some folks just like them in the church today. When you use money for something they disagree with, well, they get testy. They're glad to spend money on things that support, things that they're going to benefit from. But if you spend something that doesn't help them, they get as mad as an old wet hen. They begin working behind the scenes to take you down. Like the Pharisees, they don't care who they have to hurt to protect their assets. While this passage paints a pretty bleak word picture of folks, it doesn't leave us hopeless. Jesus contrasts the hatred of these folks against the unconditional love of one of his disciples. Let's continue reading there in Mark chapter 14, verses 3 to 5. "While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of a man known as Simon the leper, a woman came in with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, 'Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor.' And they rebuked her harshly." If you read in the book of John, chapter 12, the first 8 verses, he makes it clear that this was Mary of Bethany, the sister of Lazarus and Martha, who was anointing Jesus on this day, using an alabaster flask of very expensive oil. The fact that she was doing this tells us that this was an extravagant display of devotion to Jesus. Spices and ointments during this period in time were often used as investments, a lot like our 401ks. They were small, they were portable, they could be easily sold. Only the best of perfumes and oils was preserved in alabaster. She broke the alabaster jar and she poured the nard on Jesus' head. Mark's wording indicates that she poured the entire contents of the bottle on Jesus' head. Now, it was customary to anoint a guest's head with just a drop or two of oil. But a whole flask of very expensive oil being poured on someone, that got people's attention. Mary had shared much more than a customary greeting. She did it without saying a single word. But Judas, one of the 12, he had plenty to say. He was fit to be tied. He blurted out, "Why was this expensive oil wasted? We could have sold it and given the money to the poor." In John's account of this event, he makes it very clear that Judas didn't really give a hoot about the poor. He was in the habit of pilfering from the apostles' collective money pouch. This oil was worth a year's wages. That would have been quite the haul in the money pouch. Judas might have been the initial pot stirrer. But friends, he wasn't the only one raising a red flag. Mark made it very clear that Mary was being criticized by multiple folks. Each one looked at the oil on Jesus' head and considered it wasted. But Jesus had a completely different outlook. Let's read on there in Mark chapter 14, verses 6 to 9. "Leave her alone," Jesus said. "Why are you bothering her? She's done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare me for burial. I tell you the truth. Wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Here we are over 2,000 years later, across the globe from where they were, still talking about this woman's act of sacrificial love. Friends, Jesus puts a whammy on these complainers. He says, "You guys leave her alone. You're always going to have the poor with you." But Mary's hit the nail on the head. Whether she knows it or not, she's anointed me in preparation for my burial. You see, while the poor will always be here with you, and friends, they're still here today, I'm getting ready to give my life for you, Jesus says. As sure as you're standing here, what Mary's done will be shared everywhere the gospel is preached. Her act of love, her act of kindness will be lifted up as a memorial to her. Friends, Mary understood what the disciples didn't seem to understand. When Jesus said he'd be delivered into the hands of wicked men and mocked and scourged and crucified, she believed it. Jesus was about to die. Her gift was truly thought out, and it was very appropriate. She's done everything in her power to support Jesus during this difficult journey to a hill called Mount Calvary. She's chosen to use what may have well been her family heirloom to express her love for Jesus. And Judas seems to be taken back by all this. This seems to be the moment that pushed Judas over the proverbial edge. Let's read there in Mark chapter 14, beginning with verse number 10. "Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray Jesus to them. They were delighted to hear this and promised to give him money. So he watched for an opportunity to hand him over." Judas headed straight toward the religious elite. Matthew makes it clear that Judas even bargained with them for the life of Jesus, asking them what they were willing to cough up for him. If Jesus wasn't going to let him fill the money pouch so he could pilfer from it and fill his pockets, he'd get that money pouch filled some other way. The religious elite, they agreed to pay Judas 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave, to betray Jesus. And Judas has provided them with a safe way to reel Jesus in. From this moment on, Judas is looking for a way to hand Jesus over to these evil men. A sly way, a covert way, a way that would keep the religious elite safe and still get their task accomplished. The religious elite had wanted to destroy Jesus for a long time. And now they had a proverbial mole, an infiltrator, if you will, among Jesus' 12 closest disciples. One of Jesus' own was willing to betray him. And that's where we leave the story of Jesus this week. The question we need to ask ourselves as we conclude this morning is, will we honor Jesus like Mary did? Or will we betray him like Judas did? Your eternity may rest on the choice you make here today. If you're ready to honor Jesus, now's the time to come as we sing, "Oh Jesus, I have promised."